Most Motherwell supporters had waited their whole life to see their side lift a trophy. Then Tommy McLean showed up, pulled them back from the brink of bankruptcy. This is a story of Motherwell, the 1991 Scottish Cup final and one of Scottish football's greatest fairy tales.
4 minutes of extra time gone, and Motherwell draw on all their reserves of courage and determination.
After a merger between two amateur outfits, Glencairn and Alpha, Motherwell were formed in May 1886 with their first match said to have been a 3-2 win over Hamilton Academical. Within 7 years they had turned professional, and when the Scottish League system bloated into two divisions, the Well, or the Steelmen as they were known, were one of its 10 founder clubs. The club played its first game at Fir Park in 1895, typically getting pumped 8-1 by Celtic in its inauguration. But by 1903, Motherwell had finally gained promotion to the top flight and within 10 years had found their now traditional claret and amber colours. It was only after the Great War that Motherwell strengthened, John Sailor Hunter continuing in his role as manager since 1911 as he took the club to silver medals in both the league and cup by the start of the 1930s. Sadly, Bill Struth's indomitable Rangers side got in their way in the league and Celtic had the Wells number in the 31 Cup final. This would be repeated twice more in the 30s, Celtic dispatching of the club 2 years later and even Clyde thrashing the Steelmen by 4 to end the decade. Enter Willie McFadyen, who bagged a monstrous 52 goals in the 1931-32 campaign, a tally that helped towards the club's tally of 119 and helped usurp Rangers by a stonking 5 points. With Scottish football's postponement in 1939 and the end of Hunter's managerial reign, it should be no surprise that it remains Motherwell's only league title. His successor was George Stevenson, who arguably brought along the club's next golden age. Whilst Bill Struth was still going at Ibrox, he faced greater challenges from Hibs and Celtic. Meanwhile, Stevenson's Motherwell team were frankly nowhere, eventually relegated in 1953. So you're probably going, that's not much of a golden age, is it? Well, let's take a look at the cup successes that Stevenson bestowed to Fir Park. First off was their first ever cup, the League Cup in October 1950 and the late 3-0 triumph over Hibs. That was paired off with a potential cup double at the end of the season, but for a Celtic win at Hampden in the Scottish Cup. Not to worry, the Well turned up 12 months on, annihilating Dundee by 4 goals in front of 136,000 at Hampden to win the club's first Scottish Cup at the 5th time of asking. The club were then shepherded through the 60s by Bobby's Ansell and Howitt, with humiliating relegations being instantly corrected as a swinging decade made way for the mediocrity of the 70s. With Bobby Howitt's departure for Ian St John in 1973, so began a whirling dervish of managers, the most successful of which, Willie McLean, who took the club to 2 Scottish Cup semi-finals in the mid-70s. Roger Hinn stuck around for a year, Ali MacLeod got the club relegated in 79 and it wasn't until Davy Hay took the club over ahead of the 81-82 campaign that Motherwell re-emerged into the top flight once again. The club's greatest ever Christmas present could be said to have been reserved for 1981 when Meat Man John Chapman slinked into the board of directors. It's probably not hyperbole to describe this as essentially day zero for the club. They were massively in debt, circling the drain and paying for mistake after mistake both on and off the football field. They had been unable to refuse low-ball offers, case in point being Celtic's 90 grand offer for Brian McClare in 82. 1982, a year which was getting on for quite a good one until that kick in the teeth. The Well were ending their 3-year stay in the second tier with a comprehensive promotion. 2 years later, after a disastrous Jock Wallace spell in charge of the club, Motherwell went down again. The 1980s were already a difficult time for Scotland.
You know, these weren't men with a trade. Oh, fucking Thatcher!
And even the traditional form of escapism in Motherwell, that being football, was just as bleak. Something had to change. In June 1984, Tommy McLean was named as a new Motherwell manager, bringing Tom Forsyth with him as assistant from Morton. He had just become the 9th different man the club had employed in 11 years as manager, the task still the same, arrest the slide. Instantly he gets a feel for the club as he is forced to sell both Stuart Rafferty and Kenny Black, and so the whirlwind of backs against the wall transfer activity that would mark McLean's early years at Fir Park began, and at least for his first season it would be spent in the second tier of Scottish football.
Space to go inside, there comes pass from Harrow, good play from Motherwell, a chance for McAllister, forward for the header.
The only sourceable footage of Motherwell's 1984-85 tells us two things. One, they were far too strong for the First Division, and the 4-0 triumph over St Johnstone was in fact played 4 days after the Well had secured their immediate return to the top flight. And two, Motherwell could on any given day still mix it with the best teams in the land, as they showed in the other piece of footage there, taking Celtic to a semi-final replay at Hampden. Now sadly that replay would be a 3-0 whitewash for Celtic as they took the cup home, defeating Dundee United. But given Motherwell's incredible points tally, it was obvious that they were ready for the Premier Division. Promotion had been secured with John McStay's only league goal for the club, the only strike in a 1-0 triumph over Partick Thistle. Alas, much like in '82 also when Motherwell were promoted, it didn't insulate the club from losing some big name stars. Gary McAllister and Ali Moughlan were both lost to Leicester for $250,000. Naturally that wasn't reimbursed into the playing staff, instead swallowed up whole into the overdraft. McAllister was said to be the best product of the Motherwell system, and McLean was busy designing his own policy, claiming it would take 5 years to bear fruit. Much like south of the border, pay disputes between broadcasters and organisers took up plenty of the 1985-86 season. Thankfully for Motherwell they were rotten, and even more thankfully they picked the perfect year to come up. Relegation had been suspended thanks to yet another Scottish football restructuring. Their 9th place finish level on points with a piss poor Clydebank, but it was the Steelmen who could boast the worst away record in the division and the most defeats. John Riley was a rare bright spark drafted in from Dundee United, whilst Fraser Wishart had made his debut and looked decent enough in defence. The 1986-87 campaign showed a little bit more promise.
Stay. Kennedy, and it's a beautiful goal by McLean. Of him, and now Mo Johnson. There's a brilliant ball. Aiken goes in. Can he make it? He's done it. A brilliant goal. Paul McStay. There's no offside this time. Surely it's a goal. Yes, it is. Looks towards that far side. There's a chance. It's a goal. It's the equaliser. And this. No goal.
Yes, that really is Motherwell being mere spot kicks away from eliminating Celtic and going to Hampden to play in their first final since 1955. The cup run was arguably the brightest spark of an otherwise tepid season in the top flight. In what was now a 12-team division, the bottom two would be going down, giving the Well more of a risk. Again, it was another fairly abject season on the pitch, with the highlight reserved for a non-competitive game when Kenny Dalglish brought up a Liverpool side to mark Motherwell's centenary year. Elsewhere, and again matters away from the actual football, McLean's vision for the future was further bolstered by the hiring of Bobby Jenks to serve as chief scout for the youth side. All round, the club was slowly but surely becoming more professional. And if you had to pick a highlight out from the league campaign, it was the away triumph at Ibrox in November against the new-look Graham Souness-endorsed Rangers. Ray Farningham with the late strike proving that money wasn't quite the be-all and end-all in a 1-0 win for the Well. Still, McLean had spent wisely. Stevie Kirk, Tom McAdam, Craig Patterson and Dougie Arnott all brought in over the course of the campaign. Paul Kinnard and Steve Cowan would follow ahead of the 87-88 campaign as Andy Walker departed for Celtic for big money. Wake up babe, new Scottish League restructuring just dropped, this time with 3 teams destined for relegation, ending a somewhat temporary 12-team league and reverting back to 10 clubs. This at a time when Motherwell were becoming robust and actually looking to be on the right track, even if they were certainly still mid-table fodder. In scoring 37 goals, the Steelmen scored fewer than 2 of the eventually relegated clubs, Falkirk and Dunfermline. Yet their defensive record was far greater than those teams and certainly better than Morton's abysmal 100 goals shipped. And yet once again the season was landmarked by another League Cup semi-final early on in the campaign.
Kirk is a target. That's a good header. And a superb goal for Motherwell. It's Paul Smith. Duncan at full stretch, he's missed it. The header goes in. Patterson, that's towards McCoist. Fleck is there and the ball's in the net. Durant leaves it. There's Fleck. The great save, but Falco's there.
And typically that meant going down to an old firm team, this time the team of their day, Souness's Rangers. Meanwhile, at Fir Park, McLean had become a director at the club, such was the level of trust placed in the man. In the 88-89 campaign, goals dropped from 0.84 per game to 0.69 as Stevie Kirk netted 14 of the club's 25 strikes from midfield. Again, however, the Wells' defensive record was good enough to survive. Their 44 conceded on a par with Celtic in third. Thankfully, in this first 10-team season, Hamilton Academical were pure dog shit and went down with 14 points from 36 fixtures. It wasn't the campaign to be selling talented wingers like Paul Kinnaird, and whilst the establishment of Chris McCart in defence certainly helped, goals were needed. Colin O'Neill's 15 grand signing from Portadown, another string to the club's bow, but he was never going to be prolific from midfield.
Motherwell. Steve Kirk has made a good run. It's a kick right in the corner of the box, taken by Kinnaird. Oh, there's an own goal! Setting up a shooting chance. Still Russell. And Bobby Russell! Here's Steve Kirk for Motherwell, and yes, a goal!
So the Well were doing just about enough to survive. Their league positions told us such, and whilst their points per game ratio averaged about 0.7, it had stagnated over the prior 3 seasons. Then, the turning point, and he was called Davy Cooper, a £50,000 signing from Rangers. Not only did he give the club more of a nous going forward, but an extra dimension, unlocking Tommy Boyd in both defence and midfield, who had been with the club since he was a 16-year-old YTS trainee. Further firepower was added with the acquisition of Peterborough United's Nicky Cusack. New experience included George Burley on a free to replace the hole left behind by Fraser Wishart, as a tribunal set his sale at 287 grand, enough to creep the Well back into the black.
Well, that's not a bad ball. Cook was behind it. There's Boyd! Beautiful reverse pass. What a goal!
Now you rarely see the jump up in quality. The club finished in 6th, their highest in the top flight for a generation, when Willie McLean took them to 4th in 76. Their points per game was almost touching 1, and they finished the campaign level on points with the almighty Celtic, who were by this point spiralling the drain. Motherwell were beginning to team resilient one-off cup form with a strength over the marathon of a league season. It was a new decade and a new feeling in Motherwell. Tommy McLean went for the jugular in the transfer market. A comparative fortune was splurged on action man haircut himself, Luke Nyholt from Switzerland at 100 grand. Ian Ferguson's signature from Hearts demanded the same amount of money thrown at it too, whilst Ian Angus and Joe McLeod were also added in a much calmer summer that simply topped up the quality at Fir Park. Sadly, they couldn't squeeze another year out of George Burley, who instead opted to move to Ayr United as player-manager. But in late November, youth prospect Phil O'Donnell came into the squad. By that stage, Luke Nyholt had broken his leg and Stevie Kirk had fractured his cheekbone in the same week. Dougie Arnott, though, was actually starting to score some goals for the club, and Colin McNair had been sacked after a training ground bust-up with Jim Griffin. Just another season at Fir Park.
A substitution going to be made by Motherwell before this free kick is taken. Player going off is Ian Ferguson, and the replacement is Steve Kirk. Cross it goes to Kirk. And it's first shot of the match has put Motherwell ahead.
After 2 months out with injury, it was Stevie Kirk with a winner against Aberdeen after just 18 seconds on the pitch. Aberdeen comfortably one of the bigger sharks in the draw, as Motherwell had just eliminated this year's title rival to Souness's Rangers. 4 days later, Nyholt spectacularly returned for a 1-1 draw in the league against Celtic. The result still left Motherwell in danger of relegation as they sat 8th and only 2 points off the foot of the table. Soon enough, however, the team would be carried through a wave of euphoria and cup promise.
Pointing to Evan McGibbon, a great chance for the equaliser. Slanting that in towards Angus, looking to help it on. Here's a chance now for Joe McLeod. Albert Williams, the back healer releases Taylor. The early cross goes in, there's Cusack nodding it back. Here to Russell. Motherwell going for the kill now. Here's Steve Kirk. Now Cusack! That settles it! bench looking on anxiously. So O'Neill has the chance to win the tie and take Motherwell through to a semi-final against Celtic. Totally convincing. Motherwell are through. Celebrations.
Once again, Stevie Kirk helped turn the tide of a cup tie in '91 when he came off the bench against Falkirk, this time scoring with his second touch in a fourth round 4-2 win over lower league opposition. The quarter-final still meant lower league opposition, but a bigger banana peel in Tommy McLean's former side, Morton. After 2 drawn games, who else but Stevie Kirk to slam in the winning penalty and confirm Motherwell's place in the semi-finals. They could no longer avoid the more punishing opponents as they were drawn Celtic, but this was a Celtic side that were still well off the pace and a Celtic side that Motherwell had just beaten 2-1 at Parkhead in the league. It was a much needed win as they pulled up to 7th ahead of Dunfermline to give themselves a little bit more breathing room and effectively sealing their top flight status for another season.
Cross, first time effort, there's a chance for Arnott. Motherwell are back on level terms. Headed there by Collins. Clear headed over Rogan. Takes possession from Motherwell. There's the header and the equaliser for Motherwell. It's now O'Neill. Run made by Cusack has a fine effort. Colin O'Neill has scored for Motherwell. And winning the ball from Dubček. Back it goes to Kirk. That's a delightful ball to the far post. It was in. The referee has given the goal. Steve Kirk has scored again for Motherwell.
The Steelmen had shown steely focus to hold Celtic to a 0-0 draw in the first semi-final before 6 days later a completely different game as the usually stoic attacking Motherwell side smashed 4 beyond their opponents. For the first time in 39 years, the Well were in a Scottish Cup final. Now the whole time had gone completely bananas. Claret and Amber all over the gaff, coach hire companies counting the cash. The Well were back at Hampden in advance of the final. Motherwell won all 3 home games without conceding a goal. Against Hibs, Rangers and against final opponents Dundee United. Whilst Dundee United were one of the frontrunners to upset the old firm duopoly and could make a claim to being one of the stronger teams in the land in the 80s, their record at Hampden was utterly garbage. 7 finals they had played since '74, all of them had been lost. All the domestic cups they had won had been secured at Dens Park in the League Cup, home of their rivals, either in a replay or in an all-Dundee final where their eastern venue made more sense. Motherwell's team cost a total of £435,000, almost half of that being on Luke Knight, Alton, Ian Ferguson. Only Ali Maxwell and Tommy Boyd remained from the squad McLean had used in his first season 7 years ago. Meanwhile, Jim Griffin was basically there from the start, signed in '85, but his career had been stop-start due to injuries. Sadly, one casualty of the 13-man squad for the final was John Philibin, who had played so well against Celtic in the semi-final. Regardless, Hampden was ready.
Motherwell releasing the early cross. There's Ferguson. It's a classic from Motherwell. Boy, look at the wake of Oliver Hernandez and equaliser. The goal has been scored by Bob with the free kick. The keeper Craig Patterson getting up well. There's the header and the goal for Motherwell. McKinley coming on. Wanted a chance for Angus. It's time for United to come back. This bomb is crossed, the chance is on! Sean O'Neill for United! Here's a chance for United, Darren Jackson's on his own, out comes Maxwell! Jackson has scored! Alan Main. Main's in trouble, it's been kicked! The super sub has done it again!
That's fucking some result for the Well, isn't it?
Yes, we're back in Scotland and we're staying here for our next tranche of videos. To see other stories from Scottish football, click on this playlist right here.